We are going to be on air pretty soon.
All right. Everyone, can you hear me out there in the world of Ice and Fireland? All right.
Maybe we are.
Everyone, can you hear me out how's it going, everyone? In the chat, we got a special edition of Nooners of Ice and Fire today with our special guest, Milt K, the geophysicist. We're going to be talking everything geology as far as the world of Ice and Fire. Oh my god. Oh my god. Sorry, people. Had a little issue there. Anyways, I apologize. I'm going to go ahead and let MackenzieLBurns introduce herself while I get my stuff situated.
Hi everybody, you know who I am because I'm on Johnny's channel almost every single week or every single day almost, it seems like nowadays. You can find me on my channel, and on Tuesday we're going to be starting what I like to call episode club, where we are going to be taking each episode of the Game of Thrones and analyzing it, and I happen to have two people who will be on it with me, and I believe Elmar, who's in the chat, she'll be on it with me as well. We're going to be going over the first episode called Winter is Coming, and I hope you guys come and join us. Go ahead, Johnny.
Awesome. Yeah, I just want to apologize. The OBS lag took control of my mind, and I just got stupid for a second. But this is going to be a special presentation by Milt on a lot of the science of Planetos or Westeros. It's not officially Planetos, but Milt's going to really inform us today. So take it away, Milt. Tell them who you are and what you're going to be doing today.
Yeah, hey guys, it's Milt from the Citadel Trivia. That's probably where you guys will see me every other week, just basically hosting a trivia stream. I'm also on various other streams, and this is the first time I'll be on Johnny B. Crazy's channel, so thanks a lot, Johnny, for having me on. What I'd like to talk about today is basically something that, is sort of a rehash of what I streamed about 6 months ago, talking about, the science behind the Doom of Valyria, but I'll try to expand it a little more to the Doom of Valyria, as well as the breaking of the Arm of Dorne, and kind of implications for the Long Night, and what I think's happening with the Long Night that still needs to be worked on. So the title of this is really, try and break down, okay, what happened with the natural disasters of Planetos, and whether or not these things can be explained by science or magic, or neither, or a combination of both. We don't know. Planetos is a kind of an interesting word, considering that I checked it yesterday. It hasn't even been mentioned anywhere in the Song of Ice and Fire lore. So Planetos is evidently a fan created a name for the world of Ice and Fire, which I thought was pretty interesting because everybody always talked about Planetos as being like the world that they live in, but that's not necessarily true. Anyway, so in this presentation, I'll be going through some figures and some observations from the books, as well as from previous work made by some of the guys that I have knowledge below in that lower left-hand corner of the screen. Miles Trier, he's a scientist from Stanford who's done a lot of work on trying to reconstruct the geological history of Planetos. And then I grabbed some figures from the Atlas of Ice and Fire blog. And lastly, there's some random figures that I kind of like Googled around for kind of like miscellaneous figures, but they're pretty good figures. So I don't know who did them, but other than Google, had them available for me to copy. So anyway, so at the risk of droning on and on, let's get started now with the Doom of Valyria. So essentially, really cool picture. Big dragon's gonna die pretty soon. So what really happened in the Doom of Valyria? Well, basically what we know is that there was a volcanic cataclysm, right, that occurred about 400 years before the events of a Game of Thrones. Okay, so one of the quotes from the World Book is that every hill for 500 miles exploded, filling the air with ash and smoke. and fire from the 14 flames, which killed all the dragons that were flying around. For scale, I have two maps in the upper right-hand corner here. One is the map of Planetos and where Valyria sits, so it's basically in the southern part of Essos, and basically that little circle represents the Valyrian Peninsula. And for 500 miles, for another scale, is that if you look at the United States, pretty much that's kind of like the 500-mile radius of the United States. So basically, it covers Texas all the way out to Alabama, north to Nebraska, and west to Arizona. So it's a pretty big area. Okay, that's for scale for everybody. That's for context for everybody.
I think your sound might be a little low on your end.
Okay, is that better?
I don't know, but
Okay,
that'll let me know.
cool. Okay, and the third point is that the hills split asunder, and that the waves in the sea whipped and churned. All that stuff is associated with volcanic activity and or seismic activity. And then a couple of maps you see in the bottom right-hand side shows you the before picture of what the Valyrian Peninsula looked like. Then afterwards, you see it kind of being busted apart with a big, almost a big straight line where the 14 flames were. So those are the maps. Got fragmented, and basically that all the waters inside of the old Valyrian peninsula, they are referred to as the Smoking Sea. Basically, supposedly any ships that go through them basically disappear, or the crew just dies for whatever reason. I got my theories on why they die.
Right, and didn't who was that flew with the dragon? One of the last dragon lords flew a dragon with 30,000 men down to Valyria to reclaim it, and they never returned as well. So yeah, that's very interesting. I can't remember his name. Oh, Arion.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
yeah, that's one. Sorry.
Yeah. Little factoid from Johnny. Everybody give him some applause. Anyway, so next, okay. Now, before we get going as to what happens in a Doom, okay, I want to introduce everybody to the concept of plate tectonics. Okay, this is our current understanding of how plates shift on the Earth and move around. Okay, it's not a meteor impacting the Earth and splitting up continents all over the place. Okay, it's a very passive type of process that occurs over hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. Okay, I mean, if a meteorite did crash into Earth and basically split the continents, there'd be no more Earth left. It could be so huge and so dense that it won't, there'll be nobody left to record any kind of events or any kind of planet left. So I just want to say that first. So basically, in plate tectonics, there's basically three different types of plate margins. What you have is a subduction zone, which is a critical, which is a kind of a critical type of margin that I'll use to kind of put the Doom of Valyria in context. Then you have these transform zones, which is basically two plates sliding relative to one another with not much vertical offset. And then you have these things called spreading zones, okay, where basically plates are being pulled apart as opposed to coming together. So subduction zones, plates are coming together. Transform zones, plates are sliding along one another. Okay, and then spreading zones where plates are actually pulling apart and new materials being formed. So the spreading zone is actually, the spreading zone, we see that in the Atlantic, right? It's what the mid-oceanic ridge is. That big structural feature that you see in topographic maps along the seafloor is, a spreading center. So basically, magma's coming up through the spreading center, and basically building rock. In the Pacific, what you see is a ring of trenches and oceanic volcanic arcs that basically make up these subduction zones, and that's where oceanic crust is basically subducting underneath less dense continental crust, and you form volcanoes behind it, and also big trenches. The purple zone is occasionally referred to as the Ring of Fire, and it's basically along these subduction zones. The reason why is that you create a lot of volcanic activity and earthquakes, and transform zones are basically these plates are sliding up against one another, and that's what you see in the San Andreas Fault in California. That's an example of a transform zone. So, so anyway, that's the Earth in a nutshell, right? So it's basically you create stuff, you pull apart plates, you subduct stuff, you destroy plates, and plates slide along one another. In all instances, in general, you are adhering to the principle of conservation of mass, right? You're not actually creating new material. You're creating new material and destroying stuff at the same time. So no magic involved in this whatsoever. So if you go to the next slide, let's talk about spreading centers here for a minute. Uh, I'm just gonna show one little analog, and that's in the Westeros. Essentially, if you look at Westeros, it's a really long continent, about 3,500 meters long. And if you look at the map to the right hand side here, the Narrow Sea is actually a spreading center right now, right? Because you can kind of see how Essos, the western portion of Essos, kind of fits the eastern portion of Westeros. Sort of like, how the South America kind of fits Africa. So we think that's it. So basically, if you kind of look at this present day and kind of extrapolate out into the future, the Narrow Sea is probably expanding, right? The continents are being pulled apart more and more and more, and that analog is similar to what's happening right now. What happened with the Atlantic and the Pacific? Essentially, the bottom left-hand corner shows kind of like 250 million years ago, we had this big supercontinent called Pangaea, and then you basically start pulling apart the plates relative to one another, and eventually, uh, today, you basically have, you basically have the present-day positions of North, South, America, Africa, and Europe. Uh, if you go back to the previous map, I think what you should be able to deduce is that the Atlantic is growing and the Pacific is shrinking right now. Okay, so just like the Narrow Sea is growing and the Sunset Sea probably is shrinking somewhere.
And that's why you have all the volcanic activity in the Pacific more than the Atlantic, correct?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so if you go back to the map, the plate tectonics map earlier on, you kind of see the Atlantic is pulling apart, so it's actually getting larger and larger, and everything is being squeezed in the Pacific, especially along the western margin of the Pacific. All right,
Yeah, very interesting.
pretty cool, right? So now my favorite topic are subduction zones, okay? Because that really plays into the whole Doom of Valyria scenario here. And this yellow portion again is this ring of fire. Okay, again, lots of volcanic activity, lots of earthquakes. You get large, earthquakes. Obviously, in Mexico City, in Mexico, we had a 7.1 earthquake late, last summer. And I think we had an earthquake just recently, about a couple of weeks ago, in Bali, and Indonesia. That was an 8.0 earthquake, right along the low subduction zone here. So essentially, in these subduction zones, what you have is that you have a higher density oceanic crust. Right? Oceanic crust is higher density because it contains more iron and magnesium, basically subducting underneath a less dense continental crust. Continental crusts generally are more predominantly composed of like aluminum and silica, which are less dense elements. So basically, it dives underneath it. And what happens as it goes down, at the forefront of where it starts to go down, you develop these really big trenches. And a trench like this would be something like the Marianas Trench, which can extend down to like 5 miles or even deeper. And as the oceanic crust basically dives down, it gets heated, right? Because we're getting closer and closer to the core of the Earth. The oceanic crust will melt, okay? Then it'll turn into magma, right? It'll melt, turn into magma, and it'll rise up through the continental crust, incorporating some of that rock, and then until it starts to develop areas of pressure, which ultimately becomes volcanoes as it's trying to get out to the surface. So really, volcanoes are just a result of density differences of materials going up through the Earth's crust.
Like honestly, it's like a pimple.
Yeah, it's a big pimple. Yeah, yeah, it's a big pimple. Yeah, yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's interesting because it causes once they get stuck too, that's when you're at the point of that big earthquake because then they break apart really fast. And you cause that motion and well, yeah, keep on
Yeah,
going.
yeah. So volcanoes are pimples. Great analogy. So it's yeah, and it's formed by subduction as opposed to puberty or whatever, or hormones. So yeah. Anyway, so that's a subduction zone, and basically now I'm gonna walk through the actual Valerian Peninsula and the volcanoes that formed around there. So what happens here? Okay, so let's go look back at Doom of Valyria, 400, you know, 400 years ago, before the events of the Game of Thrones, right? And what the tectonic setting was. Essentially, what we had, if you go look at that lower right-hand corner, is that you had an intact Valyrian peninsula, and then in that dashed black box, you had what was known as the 14 Flames, which was basically a chain of 14 volcanoes, right? Okay, so ran east to west, okay, and it indicates that's probably a large fault and subduction zone that exists to the south, right? Because if this is a chain of volcanoes, then the subduction zone has to be further to the south, okay, around the trench area offshore. So now, if you look at the map itself, and basically if you take a look at the cross section from A to A prime on the block diagram, you kind of see the kind of relative locations of everything. So basically, A would be offshore, right, in the oceanic crest region. Then you have this black line here of the arrows pointing north. Okay, that indicates the subduction zone, which is the trench. And then you have the volcanoes right behind it, which is where the 14 flames used to be.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
We're about to go into when they exploded, right? I was just gonna ask you, if you could explain why Volantis didn't get hit with a
It'll
tidal
be
wave.
it'll be two more slides.
Okay, good,
It'll be
good.
two more slides. Yeah. So, but I wanted to go through the observations as to what happened in the during the Doom of Valyria, right? So the first observation is obviously volcanism, right? Everybody, the quote from the books is that, on the day of the Doom, every hill for 500 miles has split asunder to fill the earth, ash and smoke and fire. That's obviously a volcanic eruption, you know, described in more eloquent terms than what I'm used to in textbooks. But George R.R. Martin is an eloquent man, right? So the first thing I can say is that what we can observe from the books is that yeah, a wall of water 300 feet high had descended upon the Isle of Cedars. Okay, that's on that map on the upper portion of the slide there. That's the Isle of Cedars. Okay, while the city of Atlantis to the northwest, right here, was spared the same fate. So there appeared to be a big tidal wave at the Isle of Cedars, and not much happening with Atlantis. And I'll get into why that was the case, because I mean, you would think that both of those would be affected the same way, since they're equidistant from the 14 flames. But uh, there's reasons why it would not be affected in the same way. A little picture here of Krakatoa in 1883 showing a big explosion offshore. So what it means is that if there was a wall of water 300 feet high that landed on the Isle of Cedars, it suggests that there was some big explosion that happened near Slaver's Bay around to the south, where the volcanoes were. Uh, so the implications for all this, as described in the books, right, was that there was this series of eruptions along the 14 flames that had to have been triggered somehow. Okay, and however, I'll get into this later on, but it's really difficult to reconcile this event in terms of what we know because of the scale and distance um, affected. Uh, between the 14 flames makes these things really makes the situation really unlikely. But a theory is that you had the 14 flames all connected, basically as a chain of volcanoes, and then you had this big common magma chamber. So everything exploded at once, essentially, from this common magma chamber and blew up. But again, I'm going to talk about that later because that can't happen. Okay, in terms of the time scale that we're looking at, which is like days or months, right? I mean, it could happen during millions of years, but that's later. The second observation is, yeah, we have earthquakes and tidal waves, right? The hill splitting asunder obviously means that, we get these big landslides happening. And you can see this. This is like in Chile, where you have this big old landslide coming down into a town at the base of the hill. And then basically waves in the seas, the waves, the sea whipped and churned. Okay, that's pretty much indicates more of like a lot of seismic activity in the water, creating tidal waves. And if you look at this little map here, this is where Johnny's question about the tidal waves come into play here. What really affects the magnitude and development of tidal waves is really more about current direction and sea bottom or water bottom topography. If you have a lot of barriers or a very rugose water bottom, okay, it can basically inhibit the development of these big tidal waves. So, while Volantis and Alcedars were, equidistant from the actual epicenter of the volcanic eruption, you know, more than likely the Alcedars, it was a very, very flat water bottom. And basically, you were able to create these big tidal waves hitting the Alcedars, whereas to the northwest of Volantis, it could have been a lot more rugose, or it could have been counter to the prevailing current, okay, of the Sunset Sea, and you inhibit the development of these big tidal waves. And that's why Volantis wasn't really affected that much by this, and Dallas Cedars was. A lot of it has to do with circulation, current, and water bottom topography.
Yeah, also some natural features such as, well, I don't know if I would call them eddies or, things that stick up in the topography. Uh, Definitely help. And a deeper water, just logically would dissipate the wave, I would think. So yeah,
Yeah,
it makes sense.
yeah. So local conditions definitely can impact and dictate where these big tidal waves are going to hit. So, you know, Volantis, Tolos, Ilaria, all survived the Doom intact. Even despite being close proximity to the waves. You know, and the eruptions didn't really affect them at all as well, right? So it just proves to show you that volcanic events are going to be more localized in nature. Just because you have a big super volcano in the Pacific, you won't feel it in Europe or Asia, right, or something like that. I mean, these are really more local events that happens. Um, and you also get these really big, deep-seated earthquakes along these subduction zones, and you know, which will create these large tidal waves. And a really tragic event was in Thailand, 2004, where like tens of thousands of people died because there was an earthquake that happened you know, out in the ocean, but it just created this big tidal wave that just basically flooded the Thailand coast back then.
I was about to ask you a question, but it's on the next slide. So,
Cool. So let's go into the third observation, which is the smoking sea business, right? Daenerys and her infinite wisdom. Yeah, there's no smoking sea because Valyria is not yet an island. Fine, it's somewhat connected still. So I'll give it to her for now. Uh, basically, if you look at the cross section of a volcano, okay, which is what I have right here, is that you have this kind of the magma chamber is coming up. Okay, it's building pressure, and eventually it's gonna erupt right through the vent, right, or the tip of the volcano. And as it erupts and then dies down, you form this thing called a caldera up on top. So that's a remnant. That's actually a remnant of the actual volcanic event. Okay, the calderas could be inactive or active, but but it's there. And where this caldera can actually start emitting, you be emitting volcanic gases and whatever through this caldera. So the smoking sea itself, I mean, if this was part of the 14 flames at one point and they did erupt all at once, you would basically form a chain of calderas associated with each of those flames. And these calderas could be exposed as seamounts above the water, right? They're not actually underground. Like if you go to Hawaii or whatever, you get these things called seamounts where you have these basically little pieces of rocks that gas is escaping through. You can actually see like clouds of gas escaping through above the ocean surface, and that's we call them seamounts there on a small scale, but you can have the same kind of thing going on in the smoking sea. And these active calderas can have volcanic gas emissions, and volcanic gas contains a lot of sulfur. Okay, you mix that in with hydrogen, okay, from the water, from like basically steam from the ocean. You can create, under the right circumstances, create hydrogen sulfide, which is a very deadly gas. So maybe that's what's happening, as ships are cruising through the smoking sea, the crew is inhaling hydrogen sulfide and dying. I mean, we see that all the time in oil fields. It's called sour gas in oil fields, but it's the same thing. It's very colorless, very you can't smell it, and well, you can smell it. It smells like rotten eggs. But if you cannot smell it, that means you're pretty much dead because it's in a high enough concentration where you can't smell it anymore because it kills your nose nerves. And yeah, it's a pretty deadly gas.
I have a question pertaining to that and like seismic activity in the area of the Smoky Sea and the Shuroin River. When Tyrion and young Griff and Griff were on the raft and they went through and they passed under the bridge twice, a lot of people are thinking it's a time loop. But Bubba made a good point. In 1811, according to the National Geological Survey, after the New Madrid earthquakes happened, the Mississippi ran backwards for a few hours. Now, I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've seen in reports. Is that a possibility of seismic activity?
The 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 what? The time loop? The what? The what?
No, change the current of a river.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's happened before. I think it was 1825. It was like a New Madrid fault. It was like in the shores of Memphis, Tennessee. I mean, that was like about an 8.0 8.0 8.0 earthquake or something like that. It's like the largest earthquake ever experienced on the continental U.S. Or been recorded by humans, right? And that actually did temporarily divert the flow of the Mississippi, where it went north instead of flowed south.
Yeah, and shout out to Bubba for sending me that question. Appreciate it,
Yeah.
Bubba.
Yeah, yeah, and also, dog. I mean, you're right. I mean, the reason why it's called sour gas is because you can smell it. It smells like rotten eggs, but that's at a really low concentration. Once the saying goes that if you can smell it, you got time to run away. If you can't smell it, you're dead, because at a high enough concentration, it'll just burn your nose vessels and your sense of smell that you're just gone. You're wiped out.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
dangerous stuff.
like really scary, man.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, in West Texas, it's a big deal. It's really a big deal. So, so everybody in the chat, avoid, drilling deep West Texas oil fields, or make sure you have gas masks on site.
I was gonna see if Kenzie had a question while we were taking.
There was a question from a while ago, and I think it was from Bubba, and he was like, "Is that why?" Wait, hold on. Didn't Germ say that the planet containing Westeros was called Earth? I think so. Might have been in an interview that he did when someone asked, but I think that was. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think I read that article once, and I think what George R.M. meant was that it's not called Earth. It was more like if somebody was going to refer to their planet as something, it'll be just like how we were call it Earth. They would call it just like we would Earth.
And then the other and then the other question from Moni was, is there a chance that there could be blue lava? If blue lava was a thing, unless
I don't know. I've only saw kind of like a bright yellowish red lava. I can't. Maybe under certain chemical composition, you can have blue lava, perhaps. Maybe there was a lot of chromium or something like that. I no, honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, it
and
had to
then
have on it that glowed when it got really hot.
Hmm.
Oh,
Hmm. Yeah,
and then there
yeah,
was just a bunch of trolling after that.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, this whole Plantos thing is weird because as I mentioned in the intro, n- there's nowhere in the books that actually mentions Planetos. Is a fan created phenomenon. So because I checked it yesterday because we had this discussion after Johnny's stream with everybody else, with Eduardo and Johnny and the other Johnny, and it's I don't think Plantos has ever been mentioned in the books, and evidently that was right. It never has been. Everybody just calls it that because they don't know what else to call it, right? And it sounds cool.
and you'll see that it looks a lot like just like
Yeah.
like Europe and Africa, and like
Hmm.
yeah, the correlations are just too strong.
Hmm.
It's probably called Planetos because
Yeah.
George probably had mentioned it at one point, and it's like, call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
Because then people also wanted to call it Earthos at one point, and it was like, mm,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, in terms of the blue lava thing, I think some people are saying that they've seen blue lava. Perhaps, I mean, in a flame burns blue, right, when it's really hot. Sulfur burns blue when it's really hot. Well, no, when it burns, right? When it ignites, it turns blue. But a lava is kind of a liquid, so we're past the burning stage, right? We're kind of like in the heated liquid, solid stage. I don't know. Maybe there is blue lava, and perhaps it's going to be related to some kind of chemical composition thing where you might have a lot of copper or a lot of chromium in there that can make it blue. So
Would look really
I know
cool.
I've never seen blue lava.
It'd be trippy, huh? You know,
Yeah.
for sure. Go
Uh-huh.
ahead. Unless we got any more questions from the chat, I say go on.
All right.
Um,
We got time.
no.
We good?
Okay. So those are the observations about the smoke about the Doom of Valyria. So let's get into the integration here now. Can could this really happen on Earth? Could a landmass be separated by the simultaneous eruption of volcanoes? And can there really be a simultaneous eruption of volcanoes that can separate a landmass? Well, the first thing I want to say is that really there hasn't been any analogs in the Earth's geologic record, okay, as far as I know, and I've been doing this for a while now, so, of this happening, okay. So that's the first thing, okay. So there's no analog in the Earth's geologic record of something like this happening, where you have simultaneous eruption and a landmass just basically falling into the sea, okay. Uh, so and the reason why, okay, is that the scale of this event is so large, right? The Valerian Peninsula is about 500 miles wide, okay, and 700 miles long, right? So you had to have basically fractured 500 miles, okay, of rock and have all that stuff fall into the ocean. And the actual crust itself is about 19 to 44 miles thick. So, it's gonna be a really, really massive event for this to happen, and we just can't see that, given the time frame, given the time scale of which this event actually occurred in, which is like, a couple of days to a month, right, or whatever George Martin said. Uh, on the Earth itself, right, the largest calderas are about 35 to 60 miles across. Okay, so if you had 14 flames and 14 individual volcanoes, and you multiply it by roughly about 35 to 60 miles, okay, you'll have about 490 to 840 miles of calderas, okay? So you can create something like this, okay, realistically, where you have a chain of 14 volcanoes, and composed of these really big calderas, okay? But they'll all have to erupt at once again, right? Which is really unlikely. So, unless you stretch kind of like laws of Earth physics and say that it's one big humongous magma chamber, and it just basically just erupted all at once, and it was just so big and so destructive that it basically penetrated and broke through 44 miles of crust, and then everything slid into the sea. So a good example of what I'm talking about in terms of scale and in terms of time scales and distance can actually be found like in Yellowstone. This is one of these analogs that I've been trying to find for a while now. And what you see here is a chain of volcanoes that's basically been forming and forming to the northeast, okay, through the past 20 million years or so. So the red one here, you can see my cursor, is the present-day Yellowstone caldera, volcano that's been forming. And this white one here is the oldest caldera in the region, okay? And pay attention to what I'm saying next, okay? So things are getting younger to the northeast, but if you look at the timing of the volcanoes and when they erupted, we're looking at 60 million years from the time the first volcano erupted, and down to about 600,000 years ago for the last volcano to erupt. Okay, so we're looking at about 16 or 15.5 million years of activity just to form this chain of volcanoes that's roughly on the order of the same distance as the 14 flames, about 500 miles. In this case, the Yellowstone chain of volcanoes is about 450 miles, and that takes 60 million years. And then the book is saying it takes 2 days, right, or a month.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that's some serious. Well, that's a serious super volcano, and
Yeah.
you're making a lot of. It takes a lot of time to build up that pressure, but what you're talking about isn't even that much time in geological time. So like what we see as time is a little bit skewed.
Yeah. Geologic time is, we're talking millions of years is nothing in geologic times, right? In the book, in the way they describe it in natural events, right, it happens, in a couple of days, or a month or so, And I'm just trying to say that there's no example that says it can happen in a couple of days or a month. To basically develop this chain of calderas that extends out 500 miles across the Valerian Peninsula.
Right. Yeah, it would take such a massive amount of pressure, and yeah, like I was saying earlier, with there would have to be a boiling point or a nexus point of magic to
Yeah.
at that point,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
fireworms they were releasing pressure every time they mined, so it doesn't make sense for the pressure to build up like
Nope.
that.
Nope. Nope. I mean, if they're releasing pressure continuously, then you won't be building up as much you won't be building up enough pressure to actually make a big old, catastrophic explosion. And people can say, and they've always done it, that it was some kind of magic that the Faceless Men did. They went down there and they basically made all the volcanoes erupt all at once. All 14 of them go off at the same time, which is some super serious dynamite, right? Or there was a dragon in there, down below, breathing a bunch of fire and stuff like that. Basically superheating, the magma chambers.
That wouldn't work.
Yeah, it's all sorts of stuff, But at the end of the day, we have no evidence of this kind of feature forming. Okay, given the time, given the time scale that George R. Martin describes in the books. And even then, if a feature like this formed, could it be big enough to fracture, 500 miles of Valerian Peninsula of continental crust? Okay.
There was, I guess, Eduardo came in with like I guess, somewhat explanation for blue lava.
Okay. Cool.
It says the emission spectrum of chromium is blue indeed, but blue lava is an optical illusion caused by the blue flames emitted from copper, chromium, magnesium, and sulfur.
There you go. Yeah. It could be just optical illusion. Yeah. I mean, it's just that I've never seen is red.
And then LMR has a question of, do you think they have different elements in Westeros, like the ones that are missing from our periodic table, if any are missing?
I have no idea. I can't answer that question because really, the the chemistry of Planetos or just a World of Ice and Fire, whatever you want to call it, hasn't really been, you know, delved into. I mean, we know that they have bronze, so we know that they have like copper and, you know, what's the other thing for bronze? Copper and iron, or it's an alloy of something.
Right?
Uh, Copper and nickel, something like that.
Yeah.
So we know that those basic elements. We know they have gold. We know they have silver, right? Uh, so maybe the base classical metals that they would have. So if that's the case, maybe they do have sulfur and everything else. Maybe it is similar. I don't know.
Didn't at that time, didn't they have steel as well? I mean, they had all the components to make steel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They had iron. Yeah,
If I'm not mistaken, the Roynar, not is it the Roynar that had steel first that we know of,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And the thing is that as what's been described in the World of Ice and Fire, or in the whole saga, is that they seem to be using the same kind of metals that we use on Earth, right? So I mean, more than likely, I bet you it's probably the same type of elements, same kind of elements. I mean, they never described a magical element that we don't have on Earth. If that makes sense, right? I mean, even Valyrian steel, right? That's an alloy, right? Special alloy. It's not an element, right? And it's probably made by dragonfire and blood sacrifice.
Some
So
kind
there's,
of
yeah,
probably.
yeah. I mean, there's magic in there, right? Yeah, yeah. I can't. I mean, I don't remember seeing anything about any kind of special element that the world of Planetos has that Earth can have.
I just want to say, like all the animals, except for lizard lions, just about and dragons, all the animals are pretty much the same as what's in our world. All the geographical spectrums, where the people are geographically, the races of people that they are geographically, is so close to Earth that I just feel like
Yeah,
writing about a parallel Earth or something, at least.
yeah. I guess one last point I wanted to make was that there's been some theories about whether or not could we have a meteor impact, and that could be big enough to basically separate out that large piece of landmass. And the answer is no, because again, it gets to my point where something that big to basically fracture a 500 miles of continental crust, which is about 40 miles thick, you're gonna blow up the whole area, or pretty close to the whole world with something that big. Okay, I mean even the biggest meteorite that we know of, that landed sometime in the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary, right? The event that killed the dinosaurs. Okay, didn't it wasn't big enough to destroy, like, or separate continental or oceanic crust. So what happened there? It probably was magic, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a mix of science in there that we can explain, like the formation of volcanoes and whatever. But in order to compress a timeline, you got to have magic in there. That's described in the books.
Yeah, Occam's razor theory is just that so
Yeah.
much they were using built up until it exploded.
Mm.
Much.
Okay. So, if there's no more questions about the Doom of Valyria, we can get into the break of the Arm of Dorne, which I like a lot. This is brand new to me because I've been kind of looking at this for the
This
past
is
week.
kind of, I guess, slightly off topic,
Hmm.
but sort of on topic because it's about Valyria. It's like, um, what are your guys' thoughts about wild dragons that roamed Westeros? The ones no one could ride. It's like and that's because it's a bit about Valyria, and that was from Laura D. Like the non, and I guess the non-tameable dragons.
Yeah, I mean, the only wild dragons I know of that roamed Westeros were the ones on Dragonstone, right? The ones that were called the wild dragons, and a couple of them were eventually tamed, right? Sheepstealer was tamed.
Now, they have found bones of old dragons in Westeros and as far south as Sephora. So they think they once roamed free everywhere, but for certainty, I couldn't say.
Hmm. I have no opinion on that. So.
Yeah.
There's not enough evidence really,
Yeah.
so it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a theory guy, so I'm more of a facts and lore kind of guy. So I can't state anything on that.
Well, go on back, man. Thank you, Lord.
It's magic.
So sorry, Laura.
It's all magic.
Lord. Thank you.
It's all magic.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into the breaking of the Arm of Dorne because this is a really cool event I've always been interested in. Basically, what happened. George R. R. Martin writes that, the green seers of the Children of the Forest did some magic, brought down the hammers of the water down on Dorne, flooded it, and also tried to break the neck and only partially succeeded, so all I got was swamp at the neck. Okay, so it happened sometime roughly around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, before the events of Game of Thrones. Okay, according to the War Book, right? Uh, where people, were the first men basically cross a land bridge from the grasslands of Essos into Dorne and migrated up northwards. Okay, the first men chopped down a bunch of carved redwoods that pissed off the children of the forest that provoked the war. Sometime during that war, the old songs say the green seers of the children used dark magics, okay, to make the seas rise and sweep away the land, basically shattering their arm and attempting to break the neck. Okay, so this probably implies that, it happened very quick and it did involve magic. Okay, so there's no debate there. This is one theory, right? Is that magic caused all this stuff to happen. In the World of Ice and Fire book, they also reference a guy named Maester Cassander, who said that it wasn't really magic. It was just basically a slow rising of waters, basically a sea level change, right, taking place over centuries as opposed to a couple of days, caused by melting ice from the frozen lands of the sea. Basically melting glacial ice, if you will. Uh, yeah, so it could be rising seas, it could be sinking lands. Nevertheless, the idea is that there was a relative sea level rise, right, that happening at one time. Okay, and the critical point here, I love that everybody always seems to like to throw out timelines, but I'm really big into time scales here, is that we have about a 2,000 year window for this stuff to happen. Okay, sometime in the early parts of the invasion, we had this event happening between 12 and 10,000 years BC. Okay, and that matters a lot because, in order to explain this kind of scientifically, we need to be constrained by a time window.
So would you say 2,000 years would be like the minimum time window, like the smallest amount, since we have the 12,000 to 10,000 year window?
Exactly. Yeah. That's our uncertainty range, right? So I'm saying the maximum 2,000 year window. It could have happened in 500 years. It could have happened in 800 years. It could have happened in 50 years. Okay. So here's a couple of maps. So the first map on the left is the same map I showed before. Land bridge. The first men went over the land bridge to the west, went up north, and caused a big stink with the children of the forest. Then afterwards, what happens here is that you get the breaking of the arm, and this is called the broken arm, where all you see left is just bits and pieces of rock, right? So it's no longer connected. Basically, men can't cross the land bridge into Westeros, and you get the development of the neck in terms of it being swampland. Cool, right?
And I mean, like, next just basically low-lying land at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the sea level simply rose, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's like flooding a coastal plain. Yeah. So, could Archmaester Cassandra be right? Because I'm not talking about the magical part because I can't debate that, right? The dark children, the children using dark magic. So I can kind of debate and try to figure out whether or not Archmaester Cassandra was right. And this is a really good chart showing that he possibly could be right. Basically, global sea level has risen about 120 meters overall, right, since the last glacial maximum. Okay, that's the last major ice age that we've had on Earth in the northern hemisphere. Okay, I'm discounting any more of these higher frequency ice ages or mini ice ages as people call, but that's really the no, that's really the last major ice age. So that was about 20,000 years ago, roughly. Okay, right about there. Okay, and you look at the curve in sea level, it's defined by like these slow rises, then these big abrupt changes, slow rises, and then no slow rises, then fast rises, slow rises, then fast rises until we get to our present day. We're about maybe 8,000 years ago to present day. It's been kind of more gradual rise as opposed to a very sharp rise in sea level. But if you just look at where these steep rises occur, you can see that these steep rises are occurring with over the course of about 100 years to 1,000 years. So this big steep rise here occurred between say 15,000 years to about 11,000 years ago. Okay, and it was a really big change, right? It went from about 120 to about 80 meters, about a 40-meter rise. And here's another steep rise there that's lasts about 1,000 years. Okay, so and given that our uncertainty is roughly about 2,000 years, you can kind of see that we can actually rise. We can actually get a sea level rise of a magnitude of more than 50 meters at any one time. And so if the arm and neck were at a low enough elevation, then just invoking a sea level rise can basically flood the arm and flood the neck. Okay, within that 2,000-year window that we're talking about.
And we see parts of Florida getting flooded more a year today.
Yep.
So,
yeah. I mean, I saw a cool map that I had to figure outside of here, but it shows what would happen to Florida with basically a 6-meter sea level rise, and like Miami would just be all flooded. I mean, it would be craziness. But I mean, all it takes is if you just look at an example from Earth history, all it takes recent Earth history that is too. So the measurements are pretty good. That a 50-meter rise, all it takes to flood something, especially if the arm and neck were at low enough elevation. I mean, 50 meters is 150 feet. Houston, Texas is at 80 feet elevation, just to give you guys context.
And I mean, yeah, and people don't really think when you're standing on the beach, you're sitting at sea level. And I don't know, when you really think about it and the scope of everything, it really starts to make sense if you step back and look at it. Because a 1-foot sea level rise is drastic.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
imagine, that's a lot.
Yeah. So Archmaester Cassander could be right here. It could not be. It can be explained by just basic basic observations of global sea level. And we can observe the same kind of phenomenon on Earth. So, it's a valid mechanism, okay, in relation to what we see on Earth for that to happen.
So I don't know if this is relevant because we're talking books basically. A. Mule says if that were true in Westeros, wouldn't the return of the Night King cause the lowering of the water level?
No, I've been saying this for a while now. What can be happening now is that we could be entering another ice age on Westeros, right? So now, glaciers are basically being developed. They're advancing. All the water is being taken up by the glaciers, so you're lowering the sea level. And I'll get to the point about the Night King, the Long Night stuff, because the timing of that is completely different than what I'm talking about here. This is like maybe a 1,000-year kind of event. The Long Night was a generational event, meaning that maybe it could have just been lasted for 100 years, 200 years. Well, generations like what, 50 years to 100 years?
Yeah, something.
Yeah. So what we're invoking is pretty much a more high frequency miniature ice age, and I have a slide on that at the last. At the end of this. Uh, so anyway, so in North analog to the Arm of Dorne is Berengia, which is the land bridge that basically developed uh, across the Bering Strait about 16,000 years ago. At that at that close to that last glacial maximum, right, where we had a really big drop in sea level, a lot of glaciers. So you expose this land bridge. The peoples from Asia crossed the land bridge and basically migrated east and southward into North America. Okay, so today the average water depth of the Bering Strait is 40 to 50 meters. See, so all it took was about a 40 to 50 meter sea level rise to actually flood this bridge, and that's within, and that's pretty much what you're seeing on this chart here. We're looking at, you know, dips, rises of about 40 to 50 meters, or at least in this example, from 24,000 years to present day, it was 120. But, since the end of the glacial maximum, roughly about there, we rose about 120 meters.
Yeah, I'd have to say
Yeah.
that the topography and the visuals of this is pretty stunning when you compare it to the map.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What we Planetos.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, based on these paleogeographic reconstructions that people are doing, the land bridge existed roughly between 30,000 to 11,000 years ago. So if I just put that red line at 11,000 years ago, which I've done, so this is probably the point where we had the land bridge exposed relative to the sea level curve. And on the right hand side is where the land bridge has been flooded relative to sea level curve. And roughly at that crossover point, roughly there on the curve, we're looking at about 60 meters, which is similar to the water depths that we have in the Bering Strait right now.
So you would have people coming across and telling stories about how every year or every so many years the water's getting higher and higher, and then these stories would get conflated into where it becomes a flood, possibly. In my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
does
Does it what, Johnny?
that make sense? To where you talk about it being a flood afterwards, after so many generations, and then it being gone.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Game.
I mean, the rate of sea level rise, quote unquote, has increased, right? Because some people say it's because of natural events. Other people can say it's because of mankind, right, causing this. And I think you stepped out, but there was this figure about Miami where all it takes is about six meters of sea level rise, and the whole southern part of Florida would be wiped, would be underwater.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. Big flood. 18 meters. That's it. Or 50 feet. 50 feet.
yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
There was a question about from Connie Super, sorry, and it is it really broken or is it a causeway under the water like at Queen's Crown?
I think.
Queen's Crown,
Go ahead.
right? Part of the Queen's Crown. I don't know. Go ahead.
We're talking about the Arm of Dorne here, right? Is it really broken? Is that what she's saying?
Yeah, yeah.
I think what you're seeing in the Arm of Dorne is basically the stepstones is just basically remnant topography. So those are the areas which haven't been totally completely flooded yet. But it's broken enough that nothing can pass through it, right? That makes sense.
Right. If you looked at the seafloor, it still looked the same as it did. It's just underwater, right? I mean, there would
Yeah.
be some erosion. You know what I mean?
hmm So in terms of the Arm of Dorne, this is an event, or the break in the Arm of Dorne. This is an event that can happen in real life. Given what we know of Earth natural history, it can happen scientifically without the evocation of magic. It's just magic sounds cool because the way he writes it, everything happens in a short time. So once you start compressing timelines and everything like that, that's where you have to start invoking magic, right? It's all about scale, right? Magic occurs when you compress distances, lengths, and time. You need magic to basically get over those hurdles of scale.
Well, also, it is a fantasy book, but it does use limited magic, I would say, for a fantasy book. That's what I like about it.
Hmm. Cool. So last slide, and then we're done. It's basically the long night. Okay, and this is what I'm working on right now, so it's totally incomplete, but it's kind of like a teaser. Could it represent a little ice age? And the term little ice age has been around for a while here because if you look, this is a very high frequency temperature plot. Okay, so what we see here is that, and so the left axis, okay, the left hand axis is basically the temperature deviation, and the lower axis, the horizontal axis, is basically years in AD, right? And what you can see here is that between the years roughly 1500 to about 1800 AD, we had a prolonged period of lower than normal temperatures. Okay, so this is very high frequency now. It's nothing to do with sea level here, right? But it's very high frequency. And what happened here was that it really affected Europe quite a bit. It brought colder, bitter winters in parts of Europe and North America, and it led to widespread crop failure, famine, and population decline. So could this be maybe an analogy to the Long Night, where we just kind of entered into one of these little ice ages, and we may be heading into one of those things right now, with the advent of the Night King and yada yada yada? Sure. I mean, it's within the same time scale, if that makes sense.
Also, when you hear about the stories of the mini ice age back then, it's not like the stories of the Long Night. They,
Hmm.
you know, Eastern or sorry, Western Europe at the time, it was, there wasn't a lot of sun
Hmm.
and very cold, and people stayed inside the whole time, and it was a very miserable life. So I can definitely see that.
Yeah. And some of the stuff makes sense, when you kind of look at, what can be causing little ice ages. And these things could be, lows in solar radiation, like, you get decreased solar flares going on, heightened volcanic activity, perhaps, right? Changes in ocean circulation, variations in the Earth's orbit and tilt. Now we're talking about, planetary issues here, and or all this stuff can all be happening in once and in conjunction with one another. So it would be like an additive effect. Uh, so what's interesting is the heightened volcanic activity has always been one of those things that's always been proposed as being the cause of a cause of the long night. So yeah, so you've had a bunch of global volcanic activity now. You could be entering a more higher frequency ice age that's consistent with the timeline of the long night.
So, do you think there are any major celestial impacts that affected the events in Westeros as we see them today?
Any such like any meteorite impacts?
Celestial impacts. That could include comets as well.
If there was any, there's no evidence for it, and you would probably see a lot of evidence for it. I mean, if it's again, no, if it's big enough to cause a big global phenomenon, then it's going to be big enough to wipe all life on Earth. In my opinion. And then where would the record be, right, of these events if it's going to be wiping away all life on Earth?
Yeah, I have
Yeah,
to respect your opinion. You're much more educated in this than I am.
yeah,
So, yeah, I have to take that with a grain of salt and just say, yes, sir.
yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah. Eduardo said something about a night lasting generation. Yeah, I mean, we don't know how long that long night lasted, but I don't think it lasted like hundreds of years, right? I mean,
okay,
didn't
here,
it last like 50, 60, 70, maybe, or 80 years? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like if it's metaphorical, it probably is.
Hmm.
It also makes it sound cooler than a night that lasted 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, as well as Felicia asked the question are what if the odds that Planetos was also hit by a Mars-sized object to cause the tilt like ours?
again, if it did happen, it probably happened way in the past in Planetos, and then we're just kind of thinking of ideas about why it happened now. I mean, it wouldn't have been recorded. That makes sense. If something that big hit Planetos, it would just probably cause such a big devastation, big catastrophe that nothing would have survived. Maybe except for some single-celled organisms, in the ocean. Yeah, that's all I'll say because I don't really know.
They won't give a crap about rotting it down at that point.
Yeah, they got much more other problems than writing it down at that point, recording it.
One alfalfa sprout out in the.
Yeah.
So I noticed you were trying to get through the end quick. You told everybody this is the last piece, I promise, and I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts you would like to add, or anything you'd like to just say in general?
No, not really. I mean, it's just be be careful when you're trying to instill kind of science with fantasy because we are reading a fantasy book here. And if you're going to try to instill science with fantasy, just make sure that you're a little bit more informed. So, because the last thing you want to do is basically give uninformed opinions as fact to people. That's all.
And is that your PSA for the day?
Yeah, I guess. Because I guess. Yeah, just be careful because I did this 6 months ago, and it's good to always have this kind of rehash because I know that this is a big subject, especially when the show's not on. People are bored. People want to talk about different stuff. So
Yeah, we have nothing to do, Milt,
yeah.
but speculation. So you got to help us out.
So yeah. No, for a teaser next week I'll be or some other time. I'm not. It won't be next week because I don't have the time. But I like to go around and get into the geology of Winterfell too, because that's another thing I did a while back that should be rehashed too, because everybody loves Winterfell. Everybody thinks that there's a dragon underneath Winterfell, or everybody thinks that there's a volcano underneath Winterfell, and basically I'll be going through the steps of about how there probably isn't any of those things happening at Winterfell from a
Oh,
from
okay.
a scientific Earth process standpoint, as opposed to where I'm not invoking any kind of magic.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love to have you on for that, or whatever you'd like to do. That'd be fantastic.
Hmm.
Are there any questions left in the chat, everyone? I mean, we do have a geophysics. We'll take advantage of it in a good way, not like that.
Hmm.
Mackenzie, you have anything?
No, I kind of had like my question kind of answered after reading through the slide. But this is more of just like a historian question. It's like how they knew that this that the land bridge was actually there. It's like that's more of like a historian type of question where it's like they knew that it was there and then they crossed it, like even though I guess at that time, oh, yeah, it's like how it happened, like how these things happened, and then how they blame it on the other people when it was either scientific or not. But I did do a mini poll in the chat, and I asked if people believed it was the children that caused breaking of the Arm of Dorne, or if it was science, and pretty much everybody said science. So they're on your side.
Woohoo! all 20 people in the chat. Yeah, I got something going on here now.
You don't have to insult me while you're talking about the 20 people.
No, 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 no. I was messing with you, but no, 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 but honestly, books are great, right? Right, the books are great, and there's this fantasy element to it. So, uh, who's to say that there isn't a combination of science and magic causing these events to happen? The only thing I'm saying here is that, at least for the breaking of Armor Dorm, it can be explained by purely scientific means because we see those same exact processes happening on Earth today. And the Doom of Valyria is a lot different. We can't see that, and we can't reconcile that.
Yeah, exactly. And even let's take a look at the maps, and they'll blow your mind if you look at the maps side by side.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stuff there, but definitely, I know that George is writing. Isn't he going to write more about that in the Fire and Blood series? And we might find out a little more, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
It might answer some of the magic questions that we can't even. I mean, it's hard to really speculate on what happened. We have such little information. So
Hmm.
what we
Well,
do,
it'll probably happen. It'll probably be written because it's all the Targaryens up until Aegon the Conqueror. So, for that one. So, it'll probably at least hint at it. It may not like spell it out like this is what the magic is or this is the science behind it, but it's possible. They're also saying blame Milt. Felicia said hashtag blame Milt in the chat.
Hey, at the very core, it's a fantasy novel series. Okay, that's all. That's all. At the very core. So yes, there's gonna be magic there, but some things we can't explain. Via
I
other
guess
means.
Aiden says if they claim to break the Arm of Dorne, what else did they lie about? Talking about the children.
No, no, no. Did the children claim that they broke it, or did the because because the quote from the books is that the ode songs claim that the Greenseers of the Children of the Forest use dark magic. So who's writing the ode songs? It's probably the humans, right? It's the first men, probably.
Make themselves look better.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really the first men are
Yeah.
claiming that, not the children. I mean, they're just blaming the children because they flooded probably prime real estate at
Yeah.
that time,
That's a perfect point.
right?
Also, you want to give your enemy like more power, so you look better. So you look like you defeated more powerful foe.
Hmm.
If as well, a pissing contest, so to speak.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I don't know. Barry Manilow, yeah, he did it. He sang it. Anyway, well, I'm done, Johnny and Mackenzie. So
We're not done. I just wanted to say I'll be on Elamar's channel tomorrow talking ancient astronaut theory. Milt will love it. He'll go insane, and he's going to do a special about it afterwards. Prove me wrong. I will link everyone. Also, on Tuesday, we got the episode club. I'll let Mackenzie talk a little more about that. Also, Tuesday, I'll be on Ree's channel with BBM talking Legion and comparing with the comic books. Also, on Tuesday morning, I'll be on Lauren's Corner talking about just in general stuff. So I'm doing 3 streams Tuesday. Come check me out. I'm a busy guy. But I just want to say much love to everyone in the chat. I love all you guys. I'll give you a shout out in a minute. Go ahead, Mackenzie.
Johnny, you can't forget Monday with Elamar and the specialist guest that's been on, Eduardo.
He'll be there.
And so we'll have on Tuesday on my channel, we'll have the panel that was on here and Elamar talking about the first episode of A Game of Thrones. We're going to talk about how the episode went down and all that other stuff. Basically, reviewing the episode to get us through the long night. And yeah, that's pretty much what the episode club is. And you know where to find me. I'm always on here on Johnny's channel or with Elamar or with somebody. So, or myself. So, yeah, that's about it. Johnny?
Yeah, Elamar, don't be mad at me. I was trying to, let Kenzie plug it. But yeah, we're going to have the discussions basically going to be book the geology compared to Westworld on Monday, and I think Milt has something to
Uh,
possibly plug as well, right?
yeah, I don't have any really cool outros to say, unfortunately, this time because it's the first time on. But I'd like to say that I'm basically I host the Citadel Trivia every other week, roughly, with Felicia, and we just I don't know what the topic of it is this week, but we'll be on. Uh, and we're kicking off weekly streams with myself, Eduardo, and what does he call himself now? Johnny Indie Boots. Johnny Indie Boots. So he's calling himself now. And we basically go through epic character studies and have discussions. We had one last night on a Blackfish, and I think next week we'll be doing Roose Bolton. So everything about Roose. So yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
That's right, no problem, man. I just want to give a shout out to everybody in the chat. BBM, he's always popping his head in. I know he's not paying any attention. If I ask him anything about the slot, he can't even tell me, even though it was aired 6 months ago. Thank you for coming out, LMR, my co-host. Much love. You my bestie. Bubba Husky, thank you so much, man. Shout out to you. Dog City, go check out Dog City's channel, LMR's channel, BBM's channel. Special shout out to Moni G, Laura D, Cardinal Doomsday, AU Pack Mule, Felicia's in the chat. I'm not trying to say your last name because I'm a stream whore. Let's. Who else was in the chat, everyone? We had Nancy T. Was Terry in the chat? Who else was in the chat today?
I had a whole bunch of people, I think.
It was a big chat today. Thank you so much.
Connie Super was in the chat.
Forget the gray field with red peppers banner. Yeah, Connie Super.
Jake Cruz.
Jake, shout out. Just shout him out. Don't tell me to help me out.
This random person named Johnny Be Crazy. I don't know who he is.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Eduardo, Reese. We've had Forrest, Foya Hexa. Who else? Had a few good people in chat here. Yeah. Colonel Doomsday was also, we don't forget him, and Red Helm.
And thank y'all so much for coming out. Chat.
Miss Cronin, before I forget. She was also here.
Her on, and that's going to be fantastic. I just want to say thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time. Be looking out for the next Nooners of Ice and Fire, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.